The stars themselves seemed to bleed as another world died. Admiral watched from the command deck of her flagship as the planet vanished behind a cloud of feeding ships. The biomechanical vessels of the swarm moved like hungry insects, each one the size of a city. They stripped away the atmosphere first, then began eating the ground itself. "How long?" she asked her tactical officer. 17 hours until complete consumption, Admiral, came the reply. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Vex, a young whose telepathic abilities let him monitor the battlefield from a safe distance. His mental touch felt cold with despair. Closed her 4 eyes and felt the weight of 3 centuries pressing down on her shoulders. The Galactic Coalition had been fighting the swarm for longer than most species kept records. At first, they thought they could win. The Coalition represented the greatest minds in the galaxy. They could read thoughts and bend reality with their minds. There were beings of pure energy who could travel at light speed. The crystalline could process information faster than any computer. But the swarm adapted to everything. Their first weapons had been plasma cannons that could melt mountains. The swarm grew heat-resistant shells within days. They tried psychic attacks that could drive entire armies insane. The swarm developed mental shields that turned their thoughts into static. Even the quantum weapons, which could unmake matter at the atomic level, only worked for a few battles before the swarm found a way around them. "Admiral, incoming transmission from Central Command," announced Communications Officer, her crystalline body chiming softly as data flowed through her. The hologram that appeared showed Fleet Commander, the oldest and of the Coalition leaders. His energy form flickered with exhaustion. "I have the new projections from the tactical computers." She didn't want to hear them, but she had to. "Go ahead, sir." At current rate of expansion, the swarm will reach the galactic core in 47 standard cycles. Every major populated system will be consumed within 60 cycles. The numbers hung in the air like a death sentence. "We're losing 12 ships for every one of theirs we destroy. Our industrial capacity is down 70% from peak production." Felt her stomach drop. She had known things were bad, but not this bad. "Sir, what are our options?" "We're pulling back to the core worlds. All outer rim territories are being evacuated. We'll make our final stand at the Nexus system." Paused, and his energy form dimmed. "I need you to understand something. This isn't a strategic withdrawal. This is the beginning of the end." The communication ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Around her, the crew worked at their stations with the mechanical precision of people who had given up hope, but still did their duty. They had all seen too many worlds die. Too many friends turn to nothing but fuel for the endless hunger of the swarm. Lieutenant Vex suddenly straightened at his station. "Admiral, I'm picking up something strange from the outer rim. Sector 7G, near the edge of the spiral arm." "What kind of strange?" asked, grateful for any distraction from their grim situation. "There's a small system there. Single star, a few planets. The local species is pre-space flight, primitive chemical rockets, basic radio communications. But," he paused, his mental touch growing confused, "but they're fighting back." Felt a bitter laugh escape her. "Fighting back? Lieutenant, if they don't have faster-than-light travel, they can't possibly understand what they're facing. Probably just some local conflict." "No, Admiral, I'm reading biosignatures in that system. 3 scout ships, but the primitives are actually engaging them." His confusion deepened. "And winning." That got everyone's attention. The bridge crew turned toward the tactical station. Winning against scouts was impossible for anyone without energy weapons and force fields. These primitives would have nothing but chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons. Ancient technology that the Coalition had abandoned thousands of years ago. "Are you certain about these readings?" asked. "Yes, ma'am. 2 scouts are showing significant damage. One appears to be completely destroyed." Vex paused again. "Admiral, their weapons are reading as pure kinetic, metal projectiles accelerated by chemical explosives. and somehow they're penetrating bioarmor. That was impossible. Bioarmor adapted to any attack within minutes. It was organic technology that could become harder than diamond or softer than silk, depending on what hit it. The Coalition's best energy weapons only worked for short periods before the armor adjusted. "Pull up the system data," ordered. The main screen shifted to show a small yellow star surrounded by several rocky planets. The third planet from the star showed signs of primitive civilization, radio emissions, chemical pollution, and the heat signatures of basic industry. "Species designation?" she asked. Communications officer's crystals chimed as she accessed the database. "They call themselves humans, Admiral. Home world designation, Earth, Sol system. Current technology level rates at 0.8 on the Galactic Development Scale. Pre-FTL, pre-energy weapons, pre-artificial gravity. Standard carbon-based bipeds with short and aggressive territorial behavior." Studied the data. Everything about these humans screamed primitive. They still used fossil fuels for energy. Their space travel was limited to their own star system. They fought wars with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. By galactic standards, they were barely above Stone Age development. Yet somehow, they were holding their own against scouts. "Ma'am," Vex reported, "the surviving ships are retreating from the system. The humans aren't pursuing, but they're definitely scanning the debris from the destroyed scout ship." Retreating. That word sent chills through the bridge crew. Scouts didn't retreat. They either consumed everything in their path or died trying. The idea that primitive kinetic weapons could drive them off was beyond comprehension. Made a decision that would haunt her for years to come. Set course for the Sol system, maximum speed. "Admiral," Lieutenant Vex looked confused. "Shouldn't we report this to Central Command first? We need to see this for ourselves. If these humans have somehow developed a weapon that can damage bioarmor, the Coalition needs to know about it." She paused, looking at the tactical display where the scouts were indeed fleeing the primitive system. "Besides, if they're as primitive as our scans indicate, they'll need evacuation before the main swarm arrives." The flagship's engines powered up, and they began their journey toward the outer rim. None of them suspected that they were about to witness the beginning of the end of the swarm. They certainly couldn't imagine that salvation would come from the most primitive species in the galaxy. As they traveled through hyperspace, couldn't stop thinking about those impossible readings. Kinetic weapons defeating bioarmor that had stopped the galaxy's most advanced technology. It made no sense according to everything they knew about warfare. But the evidence was undeniable. In a small system on the edge of nowhere, something impossible was happening, and the galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. The Sol system looked nothing like Admiral expected. Her ship dropped out of hyperspace near the outer planets, and immediately her sensors lit up with activity. The system was far from primitive. It was a fortress. "Admiral," Lieutenant Vex called out, his telepathic abilities straining to process all the mental activity in the system. "I'm detecting massive construction projects throughout the system, industrial platforms around the gas giants, military installations on most of the asteroids, and the ships." Looked at the tactical display and felt her heart skip a beat. Hundreds of human vessels moved through space with the organized precision of a military fleet. They weren't the crude chemical rockets she expected. These ships were larger, more advanced, and they moved with purpose. "How many?" she asked. "I count over 300 combat vessels, Admiral. Most appear to be converted mining ships or cargo haulers, but they're armed. Heavy kinetic weapons, missile systems, and something else I can't identify." Communications officer Crystals chimed urgently. "Admiral, we're being scanned. Multiple targeting locks from various platforms, and I'm receiving a transmission from the third planet." "Put it on screen." The hologram that appeared showed a human male with gray hair and intense brown eyes. He wore a blue uniform with golden markings that suggested high rank. Behind him, could see what looked like a military command center with dozens of humans working at computer stations. Unknown vessel, this is Admiral of the Terran Defense Force. You are in restricted space during a state of emergency. Identify yourself immediately or you will be fired upon. Stepped forward, activating her ship's translation systems. I am Admiral of the Galactic Coalition Fleet. We come in peace. We detected activity in your system and came to offer assistance. The human's expression didn't change. You mean the biomechanical swarm that's been consuming the galaxy for the past 3 centuries? The casual way he said it shocked her. You know about the swarm? Admiral, we've been monitoring galactic radio emissions for over 50 years. We know about your war. We know about the coalition species. We know about the battles at 7 and the Vega colonies. Admiral leaned forward slightly. What we don't understand is why you've been losing. The bluntness of the statement hit her like a physical blow. Losing. We've been fighting a defensive war against an overwhelming enemy. The swarm adapts to every weapon we develop. That's the problem right there, said with what sounded like professional disappointment. You've been fighting defensively for 300 years. No wonder you're losing ground. Lieutenant Vex suddenly looked up from his station. Admiral, I'm detecting debris in the asteroid belt. Biosignatures, it looks like. 7 destroyed scout ships. Correct, confirmed. We've been dealing with their scouts for the past 6 months. They sent increasingly larger groups to test our defenses. The last group had 12 ships. None survived. Felt her world shifting around her. 12 scouts would have been enough to threaten a coalition battle group. How? Your technology appears to be pre-energy weapons, kinetic projectiles and chemical propulsion. For the first time, the human smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Admiral, would you like to come aboard my ship for a proper discussion? I think there are some things about human military doctrine that might interest you. An hour later, found herself in the command center of the human flagship. The ship was incredible. Where coalition vessels relied on elegant energy fields and psychic interfaces, human technology was all heavy metal and brutal efficiency. Everything was built to last through damage and keep fighting. Admiral led her to a strategic planning room where holographic displays showed the entire galaxy. Red markers indicated swarm-controlled territory. It covered nearly 40% of the galaxy and was growing. Your coalition has been fighting this war all wrong, said without preamble. You've been reacting to enemy movements instead of dictating the tempo of battle. You've been using weapons that rely on exotic physics instead of fundamental ones. And worst of all, you've been trying to minimize casualties. Minimizing casualties is basic military ethics, protested. Not when your enemy doesn't have casualties to minimize, replied. The swarm doesn't feel pain. It doesn't mourn its dead. It doesn't have supply lines to cut or morale to break. Fighting it with conventional military thinking is like trying to stop a flood with a screen door. He touched a control, and the display zoomed in on recent battles. Every engagement you fought has been about trading space for time. You retreat, they advance. You adapt to their adaptations, they adapt to yours. It's an arms race you can't win because they have the industrial capacity of every world they've consumed. Then what do you suggest? Asked, though she was beginning to suspect she wouldn't like the answer. Total war, said simply. No mercy, no quarter, no attempt to preserve enemy assets. When we encounter a ship, we don't try to disable it or study it. We destroy it so completely that there's nothing left to adapt from. He showed her footage from the recent battles in their system, watched in horror and amazement as human weapons tore through bioarmor like it wasn't there, fired metal slugs at incredible speeds, nuclear warheads detonated in precisely calculated patterns, and strangest of all, simple kinetic weapons that seemed to ignore the swarm's adaptive capabilities entirely. You see, Admiral, your people evolved past kinetic weapons millions of years ago. You moved on to energy-based systems and psychic warfare. Very advanced, very elegant, but also very predictable. Pause the footage on a frame showing a scout ship being torn apart by what appeared to be a simple projectile. The swarm has encountered every type of advanced weapon in the galaxy, but it's never faced a civilization that perfected kinetic warfare instead of abandoning it. Stared at the display. You mean your primitive weapons work because they're too simple for the swarm to adapt to? Not primitive, perfected. There's a difference. Brought up technical specifications that made her head spin. A tungsten penetrator moving at 15% of light speed doesn't care about adaptive armor. It follows the laws of physics, not exotic energy manipulation. You can't develop psychic resistance to momentum. The implications were staggering. If humans were right, if kinetic weapons could consistently damage vessels, then the entire war could change. Admiral, the Coalition would be very interested in forming an alliance. Your weapons technology could be the key to our survival. His expression grew cold. With respect, Admiral, we've studied your tactics for 50 years. You've been fighting a defensive war and losing ground constantly. Why would we want to adopt a losing strategy? But you don't understand the scale of what you're facing. The swarm has thousands of ships, entire fleets that could. Admiral interrupted. We've been preparing for this war since we first detected your radio transmissions. We know exactly what we're facing. He gestured to another display that showed massive construction projects throughout the system. Every asteroid mining operation, every space platform, every industrial facility has been militarized. We've been building weapons and training soldiers while you've been retreating. Felt desperate. You can't possibly handle the full swarm alone. You need coalition support, our experience, our what? Your experience losing battles. Your technology that stopped working against the enemy decades ago. His voice was polite but firm. Admiral, with all due respect, we appreciate the offer, but we'll handle this our way. This is madness. You're talking about fighting the entire swarm with primitive weapons. Not primitive. Different, stood up, clearly ending the meeting. Admiral, you're welcome to observe from a safe distance, but understand this. Earth doesn't ask for permission to defend itself, and we don't ask for help from people who've been losing for 3 centuries. As was escorted back to her ship, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something important. The humans were either completely insane or completely brilliant. Time would tell which. News of the human encounter spread through Coalition Command like wildfire, but not in the way Admiral expected. Instead of hope, she found skepticism. Instead of interest, she found dismissal. They destroyed 7 scout ships with kinetic weapons. Fleet commander's energy form flickered with what might have been amusement. Scout ships are designed for reconnaissance, not combat. Any species with basic space flight could damage one. Sir, they destroyed 12 ships in the second engagement, and they claim their weapons work by avoiding the adaptation mechanisms entirely. Pulled up the tactical recordings she had been allowed to observe. Their theory is that the swarm has never encountered weapons that rely purely on kinetic force. Chief Science Officer Militant Hex, whose crystalline form pulsed with computational activity, chimed his response. The kinetic weapons theory is flawed. We abandoned such technology precisely because it became ineffective against modern defenses. Any civilization advanced enough to threaten the swarm would have developed energy-based systems centuries ago. The meeting continued for hours, and the conclusion was always the same. The humans were primitives who had gotten lucky against a handful of scout ships. When the real swarm arrived, they would be consumed like every other species in their path. But couldn't forget Admiral's confident expression, or the massive industrial operations she had seen throughout the Sol system. The humans weren't acting like a primitive species facing extinction. They were acting like a military power preparing for war. 3 weeks later, every sensor station in the galaxy detected the same impossible signal. The Sol system's industrial output had increased by 400% practically overnight. Energy signatures suggested massive fleet movements, and long-range scanners detected ships leaving the system at speeds. "They're actually doing it," Lieutenant Vex reported from his station. "The humans are moving toward the front lines." Admiral studied the tactical display showing the slow but steady progress of human ships across space. They moved in perfect formation, hundreds of vessels organized into battle groups with military precision. But their technology still looked primitive compared to coalition standards. "How long until they reach the contested zones?" she asked. "At their current speed, approximately 6 standard weeks. They're not using any form of faster-than-light travel that we can detect." That puzzled her. Every spacefaring civilization developed hyperspace or warp travel within decades of leaving their home system. The fact that humans were making interstellar journeys at speeds suggested either incredible patience or incredible confidence in their timeline. The answer came when coalition intelligence finally cracked the human communication codes. The messages they intercepted painted a picture of military preparation that belief. Admiral Communications Officer announced, her crystals ringing with excitement. "I've decoded multiple human military transmissions. Their fleet organization is comprehensive." The data she displayed made blood run cold. The humans hadn't just converted a few mining ships. They had militarized their entire space-based infrastructure. Every cargo hauler now carried weapons. Every industrial platform had been turned into a weapons factory. Every asteroid mining operation was producing ammunition. More disturbing was the scale. The humans were fielding over 2,000 combat vessels, and that was apparently only the first wave. Intelligence suggested they had enough industrial capacity to build and support a fleet 10 times that size. "This is impossible," she murmured. "No pre-FTL civilization could organize something like this." But the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had turned their entire star system into a war machine with the efficiency of a species that had been fighting galactic conflicts for. The real shock came when they intercepted human strategic communications. The conversations were conducted in a clipped, professional manner that spoke of long military tradition. Terms like combined arms doctrine and overwhelming firepower appeared frequently. Most disturbing were references to something called total war doctrine and acceptable loss ratios. These weren't primitives stumbling around in space. These were soldiers who understood warfare on a level that made the coalition's defensive strategies look like children playing with toys. "Sir," Vex reported, "I'm detecting something else in the human communications. They're discussing battle plans for engagements they haven't fought yet. They seem to have detailed tactical analysis of combat behavior based on studying our previous battles." Felt a chill. "They've been studying our defeats." "Yes, ma'am. And according to their analysis, every coalition loss was due to the same tactical errors. Insufficient firepower concentration, inadequate target acquisition, and failure to achieve decisive results." The humans had been watching the galaxy burn for 50 years, studying every battle, learning from every coalition mistake. While the galaxy's greatest military minds fought and died against the swarm, the humans had been taking notes. Meanwhile, the swarm continued its inexorable advance. The creatures had consumed 14 more worlds since the Sol incident, and their biomechanical ships showed new adaptations based on every weapon the coalition threw at them. Energy weapons that had once been effective now barely scratched their hulls. Psychic attacks that had devastated earlier swarm vessels now seemed to make them stronger. The swarm's collective intelligence had cataloged every type of weapon, every tactical approach, every strategic doctrine used by galactic civilization. Their bioships could adapt to plasma cannons within minutes, develop resistance to psychic assault within hours, and evolve countermeasures to quantum disruptors within days. What they had never encountered was a species that still used kinetic weapons as their primary armament. In the swarm's vast database of conquered civilizations, every spacefaring species had moved beyond such crude technology within their first century of space travel. The idea that a civilization could reach interstellar capability while still relying on metal projectiles and chemical explosives was so unlikely that the swarm's strategic algorithms didn't even account for it. It was like preparing to fight modern armies and instead facing medieval cavalry, unexpected not because it was advanced, but because it was supposed to be extinct. The human fleet continued its journey toward the front lines, moving with the methodical patience of professional soldiers. Their ships broadcast no threats, issued no challenges, and made no attempts at diplomacy. They simply moved toward the war zone with the inevitable certainty of an avalanche. Coalition forces began receiving reports from the contested zones. Long-range sensors detected human ships arriving at systems that had been written off as lost. Instead of fleeing like every other species, the humans took up positions around gas giants and asteroid fields, establishing what appeared to be defensive positions. "They're digging in," observed, watching the tactical updates. "But those systems are already overrun with bioforms." "Maybe they plan to evacuate the remaining population," suggested Lieutenant Vex, but his mental touch carried doubt. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. The humans weren't there to evacuate anyone. They were there to fight. And unlike the coalition forces that had been retreating for 3 centuries, the human fleet had come to the contested zones for one purpose: to kill everything that didn't belong there. The galaxy watched as primitive chemical rockets and crude metal ships moved into position against an enemy that had adapted to defeat the most advanced weapons known to science. Most observers expected to witness another tragic defeat, another brave species consumed by the unstoppable swarm. None of them suspected they were about to see the beginning of the swarm's first real defeat in 300 years. The humans had studied galactic warfare for decades, and they had reached a simple conclusion: everyone else was doing it wrong. War wasn't about elegant solutions or advanced technology. War was about applying overwhelming force at the point of decision until the enemy stopped moving. It was about killing the other side faster than they could kill you. The swarm was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The Battle of began like every other coalition defeat of the past 3 centuries. Swarm bioships poured into the system like a living tide, their organic hulls shifting and adapting as coalition forces threw everything they had at them. Admiral commanded the retreating coalition fleet from her flagship, watching helplessly as another star system fell to the endless hunger of the swarm. 300 vessels under her command fired their energy weapons in perfect coordination, but the results were predictably futile. "Plasma cannons are ineffective, Admiral," reported Lieutenant Vex, his telepathic abilities letting him monitor the entire battlefield. "The swarm bioarmor is adapting faster than before. Energy absorption increased by 40% in the last 10 minutes. "Switch to quantum disruptors," ordered, though she knew it wouldn't matter. The swarm always adapted. That was what made them impossible to fight. The quantum weapons fired, unmaking matter at the subatomic level. For a brief moment, coalition crews cheered as swarm vessels seemed to dissolve. Then the bioships began rebuilding themselves, their hull material somehow developing resistance to quantum dissolution. "Admiral, the battle group is requesting permission to withdraw," communications officer announced. "They've lost 60% of their ships and aren't inflicting meaningful damage." Felt the familiar weight of defeat settling on her shoulders. Another system lost, another billion lives consumed, another step closer to the extinction of galactic civilization. All ships begin withdrawal sequence. Execute. Admiral Lieutenant Vex suddenly straightened at his station, his mental touch spiking with confusion. I'm detecting new contacts entering the system. Human signatures. The tactical display shifted to show the impossible. 12 human vessels had just dropped out of whatever primitive FTL system they used, appearing at the edge of the 442 system. They were massive ships, larger than anything humans had shown before, and they moved with the steady confidence of predators. They actually came, whispered, not sure whether to feel hope or despair for the brave primitives who had just signed their own death warrant. The human ships didn't attempt communication with either the coalition or the swarm. They simply formed a line and began accelerating directly toward the center of the battle. It looked like a suicide run. Admiral, Vex reported, the human vessels are on a collision course with the main swarm concentration. Their acceleration profile suggests they plan to ram the bioships. But ramming attacks had been tried before. Bioships could absorb the kinetic energy of impacts and use it to fuel their own systems. The humans were about to sacrifice themselves for nothing. Then the human ships opened fire, and everything changed. The first weapons to fire were massive magnetic accelerators launched tungsten slugs at 15% of light speed. The projectiles crossed the distance to their targets in heartbeats, too fast for organic computers to track, too fast for bioarmor to adapt. The slugs punched through hulls like they weren't there. The bioship's adaptive armor, which had developed resistance to every known energy weapon, simply couldn't process the concept of a solid object moving that fast. Physics didn't negotiate with biology. Swarm vessels that had shrugged off plasma cannons and quantum disruptors died instantly as tungsten penetrators turned their internal organs into metallic soup. The bioships tried to adapt, growing thicker armor and developing impact-resistant shells, but the slugs didn't care about adaptation. They followed Newton's laws, not exotic physics. Impossible, breathed Chief Science Officer Hex, his crystalline form flickering with rapid calculations. The kinetic energy transfer should have been absorbed by their biomatrix. But the humans weren't done. As the barrage tore through the swarm's front lines, the human ships launched their second weapon system. Nuclear-pumped X-ray lasers fired in perfect coordination, each warhead designed to focus its entire energy output into a coherent beam of hard radiation. The swarm had developed energy absorption capabilities that could handle any conventional laser system. But these weren't conventional lasers. These were focused nuclear explosions, delivering more energy in microseconds than most coalition ships could produce in hours. The X-ray beams burned through bioarmor like tissue paper, cooking entire swarm vessels from the inside out. The bioships began trying to adapt to the new threat, developing radiation shielding and energy dispersal systems. But the humans had studied galactic warfare for 50 years. They knew about adaptation cycles. Before the swarm could complete its defensive adaptations, the third wave of human weapons activated. Kinetic kill vehicles, simple chunks of metal with guidance systems, slammed into damaged bioships at relativistic speeds. Each impact released energy equivalent to nuclear weapons, but without exotic radiation or energy signatures to adapt to. The effect was devastating. Swarm vessels that had survived centuries of galactic warfare were being destroyed by weapons that looked primitive by coalition standards. But primitive didn't mean ineffective. The humans had taken the basic concept of throwing rocks and refined it until it could kill starships. Admiral, Lieutenant Vex called out, his mental touch filled with disbelief. The swarm vessels they're trying to adapt, but they can't. Their bioarmor keeps developing countermeasures for energy weapons, but these are all kinetic impacts. There's nothing to adapt to except momentum and mass. Watched in amazement as bioships died by the dozens. The swarm's collective intelligence, which had successfully countered every weapon system in the galaxy, couldn't find a solution to the simple problem of very fast rocks hitting very hard. The human fleet pressed their attack with mechanical precision. No dramatic maneuvers, no elegant tactics, just the systematic application of overwhelming firepower. They treated the bioships like industrial targets to be processed, not military opponents to be outmaneuvered. More human weapons revealed themselves. Cluster munitions that split into thousands of smaller projectiles, each one guided by its own targeting system. Armor-piercing missiles that ignored energy shields because they never relied on exotic physics in the first place. Even simple explosive warheads that used chemical reactions older than space travel, but delivered with precision that made every shot count. The swarm tried everything. They developed impact-resistant shells, only to be penetrated by depleted uranium penetrators. They grew energy-absorbing tissues, only to be destroyed by kinetic weapons that carried no energy to absorb. They attempted to develop psychic defenses, only to discover that tungsten slugs couldn't be reasoned with or confused. For the first time in 3 centuries, bioships began to retreat. Not a tactical withdrawal or strategic repositioning, but actual panicked flight from an enemy they couldn't understand or counter. "They're running," Vex announced, his voice filled with wonder. "The swarm is actually retreating from the system." The human fleet didn't pursue. They took up defensive positions around the inhabited worlds and began systematic sweeps of the asteroid fields, hunting down any swarm organisms that might have survived the initial assault. It was professional, thorough, and absolutely ruthless. A transmission came from the lead human vessel. Admiral appeared on the main screen, his expression calm and professional. "Admiral, the 442 system is secure. Casualty report: 23 bioships destroyed, 0 survivors detected. Human losses: minor hull damage to 3 vessels, no personnel casualties." Stared at him. How did you do what we've been unable to do for 300 years? His expression grew cold. "Admiral, you've been fighting this war with the assumption that more advanced means more effective. Sometimes the old ways work best." He gestured to something off-screen. "The swarm adapted to energy weapons because that's what civilizations use, but we never stopped perfecting kinetic warfare. We just made it more efficient." The transmission ended, leaving the coalition fleet in stunned silence. Around them, the wreckage of bioships drifted in space, destroyed by weapons that predated galactic civilization. The impossible had happened. The unstoppable swarm had been stopped, and it had been done by primitives with metal projectiles and chemical explosives. The galaxy would never be the same. The aftermath of 442 sent shockwaves through the galaxy that were felt in every coalition command center. For the first time in 3 centuries, a force had been completely destroyed. Not damaged, not temporarily stopped, but utterly annihilated by weapons that galactic civilization had abandoned as primitive. Admiral sat in her quarters, staring at the tactical reports that made no sense according to everything she knew about warfare. The humans had achieved in hours what the coalition had failed to do in 300 years, and they had done it with technology that any first-year military academy student would dismiss as obsolete. A chime at her door interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Vex entered, his telepathic abilities allowing him to sense her confusion and disbelief. "Admiral, Central Command is requesting a complete debriefing on human military capabilities. They want to understand how kinetic weapons succeeded where our most advanced systems failed." "Tell them I don't understand it either," replied. "Everything we know about warfare says those weapons should have been useless against adapted bioarmor." "Ma'am, I've been analyzing the battle data. I think I might have an answer." Vex activated a holographic display showing the molecular structure of bioarmor. Their adaptation works by analyzing incoming energy patterns and developing countermeasures. Energy weapons, psychic attacks, Even quantum disruptors all follow predictable patterns that can be studied and countered. The display shifted to show a tungsten slug impacting bioarmor. But kinetic weapons don't follow exotic physics. They follow basic momentum transfer. The swarm can make their armor harder, but they can't change the laws of motion. A sufficiently fast projectile will penetrate any material, regardless of how advanced it is. It was elegant in its simplicity. The galaxy's greatest minds had been trying to solve the swarm problem with increasingly complex weapons, when the answer was actually simpler technology applied with overwhelming force. "Have you shared this analysis with Central Command?" asked. "Yes, ma'am," their response was. "Interesting." Vex paused. "They want to know if we can retrofit our ships with human-style kinetic weapons." That evening, Admiral received an invitation she never expected. Admiral requested her presence aboard the human flagship for what he called a strategic planning session. When she arrived, she found herself in a conference room filled with human officers whose calm professionalism was more intimidating than any threat. "Admiral," began without preamble, "your coalition leadership has been asking about our weapons technology. They want to know if they can license our designs or form a joint development program." Felt hopeful for the first time in decades, and your answer? "No." His response was flat and final. "Admiral, your people have been fighting this war wrong for 3 centuries. Giving you better weapons won't change your tactical thinking. It will just give you better ways to lose." The bluntness of it stung, but had to admit he had a point. "Then what do you suggest?" Activated a holographic display showing the entire galaxy. Red markers indicated swarm-controlled territory, but now there were blue markers appearing along the edges. Human forces, systematically working their way through swarm-held systems. "We suggest you stay out of our way," said simply. "The coalition can coordinate evacuations and provide humanitarian aid to liberated worlds. Leave the fighting to us." "You're talking about taking on the entire swarm with just human forces. That's thousands of bioships across hundreds of systems." "Admiral, we've been planning this operation for 50 years. Every ship, every weapon, every tactical doctrine has been designed specifically to fight the swarm. We know their adaptation cycles, their breeding patterns, their strategic limitations." The expression was coldly professional. "More importantly, we understand something that your coalition never grasped. This isn't a war to be won. It's an extermination to be completed." The words sent chills through. The coalition had always fought defensively, trying to preserve as much as possible while containing the swarm. The humans were talking about something far more final. Over the following months, the galaxy watched in amazement as human forces methodically dismantled swarm positions throughout the outer rim. Their tactics were unlike anything seen before. Instead of engaging in elaborate space battles, humans would saturate entire systems with kinetic bombardments until nothing organic remained alive. They showed no interest in studying swarm technology or attempting communication. When human forces encountered a bioship, they destroyed it completely, ensuring that no organic material survived to regenerate or adapt. It was warfare reduced to its most basic elements, the systematic elimination of everything that posed a threat. The swarm, for its part, began showing behavior that coalition had never observed before. The collective intelligence that had confidently consumed galaxy after galaxy was displaying signs of something that resembled fear. Swarm forces began avoiding human ships entirely, retreating from systems at the first sign of human presence. When forced to fight, they showed increasingly desperate adaptation attempts, developing behaviors that suggested panic rather than calculated response. "They don't understand what they're facing," General Martinez explained during a coalition briefing 6 months after 442. "The swarm's entire strategic framework is based on adaptation and consumption. They've never encountered an enemy that can't be adapted to and refuses to be consumed." The human campaign was relentless. World after world was liberated through the simple expedient of killing everything swarm-related on the surface and in orbit. Human kinetic bombardments didn't leave wounded bioships to regenerate or scattered organisms to rebuild. They left molecular debris and empty space. Coalition forces found themselves relegated to support roles, evacuating survivors and providing medical aid to liberated populations. It was humbling for species that had considered themselves the galaxy's defenders, but the results spoke for themselves. A year after 442, the swarm controlled less than 20% of its former territory. Human forces had systematically exterminated presence from over 200 star systems, and their advance showed no signs of slowing. The final confrontation came at the swarm's primary breeding world, a massive biomechanical planet that had served as their central hive for. Coalition, long-range sensors detected the largest human fleet ever assembled moving toward the system, over 5,000 ships carrying enough kinetic ordnance to sterilize a dozen worlds. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the breeding world was nothing but cooling asteroid rubble, and the swarm's collective intelligence had been permanently severed. In the aftermath, scattered survivors began fleeing toward the galactic rim, pursued by human hunter-killer groups that showed no intention of letting any escape. The systematic extermination continued until coalition sensors could no longer detect any swarm biosignatures anywhere in known space. Admiral stood on the observation deck of her flagship, watching the final human pursuit groups disappear toward the galactic edge. After 3 centuries of losing ground to an unstoppable enemy, the war was over. Completely, finally, and absolutely. Admiral's final transmission to Coalition Central Command was brief and professional. Threat neutralized. Galactic space is secure. Terra sends its regards. The galaxy that had watched in silence as humanity entered the battle now watched in awe as they finished it. The most primitive species in known space had become its savior, not despite their crude nature, but because of it. In the end, the lesson was simple. Sometimes the best solution to a complex problem is the application of sufficient force at the right time and place. The humans had taken that principle and perfected it until it could save the galaxy. The swarm was gone, and the galaxy would remember who had destroyed it.